One of the things I would say, kind of on behalf of Conservative Central Office, if you see what I mean, is that everyone's blaming them for all these mistakes.
Sorry?
There's no one left. They've all been taken off duties to pending police investigation. Yes, here we are again then. It's How to Win an Election with me, Matt Chorley, joined today by our election masterminds, Daniel Finkelstein and Polly Mackenzie. How are we all?
I'm fine. You stumbled over my name there, Matt. Are you having trouble remembering who I am?
No, it's. I'm just so excited. I'm just so excited about this election. Are you all right, Polly?
I'm very well. I think this election is the worst election campaign in my lifetime by the Conservatives, and that's quite exciting. Some people have said that it might be worse than the 1983 Labour election campaign in terms of, a party managing to self-harm. And I was only born in 1980, you see, and I don't remember the election campaign in 1983. So if it is worse than
it's a shame we don't have Peter with us, because he'll definitely tell us.
It's very exciting for me,
So, in
right?
fact,
Like, history is being made.
That's what I think. I mean, I remember I was thinking about this the other day, that I started in the lobby in 2005. And there were a lot of old hands and grey beards then who'd say, oh, of course, politics is all boring now. You should have been here for 97. And I felt this sort of, in terms of news stories, Brexit and all of that, the coalition, there was some excitement that hadn't been seen before. But I just feel like this election might be about to knock 97 off that top spot. Now, which actually brings us to the first question. Peter's been in touch. You can kick us off, Danny. Peter says, does someone at CCHQ have a bet on the Tories being wiped out?
Well, the reason the Conservatives are in this position is not because of the election campaign. It's because of the fundamentals of politics. It's because of what happened during the last 5 to 6 years. That's the reason why the Conservatives are doing so badly. The election campaign are just pictures to accompany that story, right? And everybody wants to cover some mishap with the Conservative campaign because it accompanies the story. They're doing very badly. No one's going to run something that shows, a full crowd or some event that Rishi Sunak's doing really well to accompanying a story in which Reform may be about to reduce the Conservative seats into a quarter of the previous amount, because the pictures then wouldn't match the narrative. So although objectively, of course, Polly, you're completely correct. You can see all the mistakes they're making, and some of those you do look like the one at the beginning with when Rishi went out in the rain. You can say, I'm surprised professionals made that mistake. But I think that primarily the problem is the Conservative Party couldn't run on any of the three campaigns that we identified. It couldn't run on Time for a Change. It couldn't run on Britain's on the right track, don't turn back. It couldn't run on It's Better the Devil You Know. And that means that you're flailing around for a message, and all that anyone's left doing is running a story about the fact that you met somebody with a dinosaur T-shirt and you don't like dinosaurs or whatever.
But is there any part of you, Danny, given your spiel about nothing changes, is there any part of you that thinks that actually going into this campaign, it might have been possible that Rishi Sunak would have ended up with 200 MPs, and a combination of the not having an umbrella, missing D-Day, members of your campaign team being investigated by the police for betting on the election date, might actually be having an even more negative impact?
You can see it in the numbers, right? The Labour Party's number has not shifted at all, and the Conservative Party's has gone down because Reform is splitting the right vote. And clearly one of the things that can change during the short campaign, we talked about this in 2017 as well, where Labour and the Liberal Democrat vote went to Labour, that can change the outcome. But the rest is running pretty much to form. Everybody's going on and on about the rain and all these other stories that you mentioned. They have not moved the Labour vote 1 point, really. It stayed almost exactly the same. And you would think it would do if these were so significant.
Danny is half right. Of course, probably more than half right. But it's not enough to just say, oh, all of this stuff happened and the polls haven't moved, because the counterfactual is an environment in which different things happened and the polls did move. And the assumption going into the campaign from lots of Conservatives, including those around the Prime Minister, was that going into an election campaign, concentrating people's minds, the polls would narrow a bit between Labour and the Conservatives. And that is a thing that hasn't happened and might have happened at least a bit in the face of an excellent campaign. And I do think that the campaign makes a difference. It doesn't make a difference, and this is why Danny is mostly right, it doesn't make a difference to the fundamentals. The Conservatives are always going to lose this election. But I'm reminded of the Tim Farron campaign in 2017, where the fundamental reason why the Liberal Democrats didn't sort of surge back to 50 seats was because the scars of the 2010 to 2015 coalition. That's the fundamental. But why didn't they tick up 5-10 seats? It's because Tim Farron decided the election campaign was going to be about his opinions on gay sex. And nobody, in fact, really votes for gay sex, for gay sex, against gay sex. It's just not really there on the radar of issues. And so the campaign can make a difference for a few seats. And again, the crucial thing to remember for the Conservatives is so many seats can be affected at the margin, because 0.5%, 1% in the polls will make a difference to, again, those margins that you're talking about, Matt, because we have first past the post. And because we have first past the post, it means that the difference between 200 seats and 100 seats is only a couple of percent potentially.
I would argue, Polly, that it's very hard to identify an election in which the polls have moved all that much during the election campaign. The one or two examples that people use, first of all, there's the sort of misunderstanding of what happened in 2017, which we've talked about before. And then all sorts of other elections where what really happened was that the polls were wrong, like in 97, where the polls didn't narrow, they just were correct on election day when having been wildly out before. And I genuinely think that although it's the case for smaller parties where people don't have a set opinion and they notice them for the first time in the election campaign, and this is a factor with Liberal Democrat campaigns, and that can therefore split the party split between, say, on the right or on the left can change a bit, and that can be consequential. The fundamentals as to whether people are going to re-elect the government or let the other side don't move very much, and they haven't moved very much in this election. So insofar, one of the things I would say, kind of on behalf of Conservative Central Office, if you see what I mean, is that everyone's blaming them for all these mistakes.
There's no one left. They've all been taken off duties pending police investigation.
But everyone's blaming them for their mistakes, and fundamentally, I think it's working the other way. They're not losing because they're making mistakes. They're making mistakes because they're losing, right? And I'm only saying that in order that I'm not saying because I think they've run a dazzling campaign. I don't think dazzling campaign's out there for them to run. I'm just trying to see whether we can draw up a reasonable picture of what's happening, since we're going to have elections in future, and it might be as well not to misunderstand this one.
But let's remember, the specific question was, does someone at CCHQ have a bet that they will be wiped out at this election? To which the answer clearly is going to be yes. I don't know who, probably most of them, to be honest. But you don't have to want something to happen to bet that it will.
Also, I mean, it's not necessarily insider knowledge now to think that they might be. That they're probably safe putting that bet on.
I mean, I do find this truly extraordinary. Admittedly, 10 or 15 years ago, I remember once there being some bet on who would be Speaker of the House of Commons, and Mo Mowlam was getting very good numbers because she was popular with all sides of the House, but there was no way that she was going to become Speaker. And I thought, that's obviously ridiculous. She isn't going to become Speaker of the House. I could bet against that and make money. And I did not do so because it even occurred to me as a writer that I was a market mover and I shouldn't bet in those positions. For it not to occur to somebody that they were an insider and that this was a form of insider trading, even if they didn't explicitly know about the election date, that their additional access and feel, never mind what it looks like, what it actually is, it's totally unethical and also monumentally foolish to do it. By the way, I'm sure that there'll be bets the other way that Labour people have taken. People have done that on some things to do with them, which they shouldn't have done either. But in pursuit of my previous point, no one's going to be interested in that.
Danny always says, right, that the one thing that matters in politics is leadership. And leadership is also the thing that matters most in terms of ethics and ethical standards. And unfortunately, the Conservative Party has had what used to be, a sort of established belief in the Constitution and the rule of law and the rules of public life as a sort of way of being conservative. All of that has been stripped away, particularly by the leadership of Boris Johnson, and by a sense that actually propriety and ethics, those things don't matter to the voters. But at a certain point, they do, because it's not the individual events. It's the loss of credibility as serious leaders, and the fact that without somebody in charge who sets standards for the people in their team and the people in their party, all sorts of self-interested behavior sort of ferments, like making a couple of £100 from insider trading, and that that becomes toxic, and it rots the perception, and not just of that political party, unfortunately, but of all politicians.
You'll remember, Matt, that on your show I said, I was asked about one of these early scandals. I think it was the wallpaper one, where there was a lot of fuss in Westminster and it wasn't doing much outside Westminster. And I said, none of this will matter until it does. And one day it really will matter. And then once that happens, almost nothing else matters. And I think that incident was part of the Conservative appeal, was some sort of sense of kind of running government in a solid way, even if people didn't like the party. The other was that they looked after your money, which Liz Truss drove the state through. And these are the reasons why the Conservative Party is losing the election, not because of the timing, not because it rained on the press conference, not because of the gambling, after the election. But after the election, it's really important. People do not take refuge in, Isaac Levido made some error, or the Conservative slogan wasn't very good, or this is about fundamental things that have gone wrong that the Conservative Party has to address and get right if it ever wants to return.
We should, and it's not often, we didn't expect, this is not a sentence I expect to ever use on a podcast called How to Win an Election, but we should stress that only one police officer has been arrested and has been released on bail in connection with gambling. One MP is, I think, admitted putting a bet on, and two other people, including a candidate and her husband, who also is the campaigns director for the Conservative Party, are just merely being investigated by the Gambling Commission in the middle of the election campaign, for the sake of clarity. Right, up next, we'll do some more questions on how to win an election. Yes, How to Win an Election with me, Matt Chorley, with a bonus Q&A question and answer session on a Friday with Daniel Finkelstein and Polly Mackenzie. And we've had this question sent in as a voice note.
Hello, Peter. Hello, Polly. Hello, Danny. Hello, MC. It's fairly clear now who's going to win the 2024 election. It's reasonably clear who's going to win the 2029 election. So I'd like you to think forward to the podcast you'll undoubtedly be doing, How to Win an Election 2034. What advice could you offer to the party leaders, to Labour as to how to win a third term, or to the opposition parties, whoever they may be, as to how to prevent Labour getting a third term? What are you going to be saying in How to Win an Election 2034?
Polly, you'll be what, nearly 40 then?
No, I shall be well into my 50s. Peter, of course, will have been thrown out of the House of Lords for hitting the ripe old age of 80 by then. The question at its heart, right, is Labour going to be set up for 2 terms or potentially 3 terms of hegemony? Will there be any opposition? Will be, in fact, Starmer be a Putin-style overlord in which elections are abolished? And, because governing is about the fundamentals, the core question is, can the Labour Party actually turn the country around in any of the ways that they are describing? They've been very careful not to overpromise, but you still have the thing that the moment Keir Starmer is the Prime Minister, all of that weight of expectation of, can you fix the NHS now? Please, can we have some jobs? And by the way, can we stop the boats in the Channel and have lower immigration? And also, can our universities thrive? And can we invent some new sciences? And all of that will be on him. And all of that is incredibly difficult and incredibly slow. So I think what may happen is we might have a government with a phenomenal majority that is very quickly extremely unpopular.
I agree with that, actually, Polly. I think that's really quite possible. If you look at, you try to answer your question, what are the things that might settle the election result in 10 years' time? Well, first of all, we don't know what the economy will be like, but I'm, with Polly, there doesn't seem anything in the Labour manifesto initially which will make you think, well, that will definitely work to improve our growth. So there's that. So we don't really know the answer to that. And certainly don't know the answer in 2 years' time, and even more not in 10 years' time. We don't know leadership. That helps to settle it. Well, we don't know who the leaders will be. Would Keir Starmer be running again in 10 years' time? He'd be 71 at that point. So one has to judge he probably wouldn't be the leader. And because you don't know the politics of that party and how it will develop, we don't know the answer to that question either. We do know Labour will have been in power for 10 years, therefore it'll almost certainly do worse in an election in 10 years' time than it is doing now. But that may not be enough for anybody else to win an election. And fourth, and most interestingly, there's the demographic split. That really, we don't yet know what coalition the Conservative Party wishes to create, whether it's going to conclude it lost to Labour and try to form a coalition, which means it's trying to win back middle-class voters it's lost, and understand the way that their behaviours have changed, a bit like Marks and Spencer's is doing, or whether it will conclude that it lost to Reform and it will try to regain Hartlepool. And I think to some extent, this will depend not just on how well the Conservative Party does at the election, but how well Labour does in office. If Labour does, in fact, succeed in improving growth, and, for example, AI leads us to improve growth and incomes improve for parts of the population in Britain feels more successful, ultimately we'll still lose an election, but it may be more likely to lose it to a more middle-of-the-road political party. If it fails completely in office, you could, by that point, I suppose, see the opportunity for a populist party of the right to serve a term.
That's really interesting. And I suppose that the volatility of politics now, given that we saw what happened in 2015, won a majority for the Conservatives, lost it in 2017, big majority in 2019, Labour Party will never win again, worse results since the 1930s, now on the cut, politics is volatile.
So, Matt, everyone's been saying, when Keir Starmer got elected as leader, people didn't think he could be Prime Minister. And without being like Nostradamus, I did think that he would be Prime Minister. In fact, the other day, just to make sure I wasn't fooling myself, I dug out the email I sent a friend of mine saying he's actually...
Was it your friend at Lad Books?
No, it was not. It was successful. I wouldn't bet on such a thing, but I did think he would. And the reason I did think he would is because the Conservative coalition was unstable. I did not think you could hold the two sorts of places that they were going to win, their traditional constituencies and their new constituencies together. I also thought it was quite likely that Boris Johnson's premiership would hit the buffers so it was addressing. If you want to address this question, really, I suppose in my answer, address the fundamentals. Don't look at conventional wisdom, because it won't help you very much. Think about where you think the fundamentals will land at any point. And when the fundamentals say something, listen to that. Don't just think, well, that's never happened before, it can't happen again. So don't, for example, assume that Labour's majority is so solid it cannot lose next time. If a party can be swept in, it can be swept out. And I think it's likely the Conservative Party will not do the things necessary to win again in 5 years' time. And that Labour will stop it from doing that, and Keir Starmer won't put himself in that position. But you can't be sure.
Let's go back a bit closer to sort of the near future rather than 10 years hence. We've had a message texted in by Pete. He says, does it make sense if Labour win large, as expected, for them to delay the summer recess and push through the core of the manifesto pledges and any unannounced tax rises before the Conservatives have had a chance to regroup? And that's Pete in Tadley. And Danny, I suppose you've got the most obvious experience of that, of the period in 97, where clearly the Conservative Party were trying to work out who was left, who might be the leader. Is there an argument? And it's obviously slightly different because we're going into the August summer holidays and all of that. What do you think Labour should do? Should they say, look, everyone's tired, go and have a break, we'll be back in September, or should they just plough on through?
No, we're about to experience a big change in politics in which there is this massive Labour settlement, right? And which all these arguments between Mark Francois and Andrea Leadsom and just all become rendered irrelevant. And the Labour Party doesn't need to rush into do something before the recess, before the Conservative Party regroups, because the Conservative Party is going to take years regrouping, and it's going to do it without all the attention that it's traditionally had, because compared to Labour, it'll be irrelevant. And so I absolutely don't think it should. And I also don't think it will either, because I think Keir Starmer is quite deliberative. I think one of the things the press ought to do is accept that he's not instinctive and he takes time to make a decision. And personally, I've never minded about that. One of the things, I don't know what you feel about this, Polly, but one of the things that always annoys me is when everyone goes, I can't believe he didn't sack this person for about a politician, a leader. He didn't sack this person for 3 whole days. Well, that's not actually very long, and it doesn't matter. And Keir Starmer will take his time.
So there's a story about Liz Truss's premiership, which really sort of centres the idea of impatience, that because the Queen died the day after she became Prime Minister, that there was obviously this period of national mourning in which politics was paused. And that period where she couldn't do anything or say anything or announce anything led to a real build-up and sort of accelerated the programme that they brought forward. And I think that, that those sort of psychodynamics are incredibly important for thinking about how you stay in control. I think there's a real danger of looking a bit flaccid if you don't do anything straight away, but there is also a danger that period of flaccidity would lead to this sort of momentum from everybody. Why is nothing happening? Why is nothing happening? And 3 days is a very short time in history, but it is a long time in politics, and it politics, within SW1 does get sort of stuck in these fever dreams and panic attacks. So I would suggest that in order to prevent there being that sort of pressure building up for like activity, is that they do need to have a short program of 6 things on the 6 first steps. Their first steps, they've sort of set themselves up for well for that, and then have a pause so that they can do something much more substantial. I think that's the way to balance it. Don't allow themselves to become so impatient that they go mad, but neither should they overpromise and then screw it up by trying to do 1,000 things at once.
Well, wait and see. So lots of useful advice. I think we've sort of given up on really giving advice to the Conservative campaign, but useful advice for the Labour government. If you've got questions for Peter, Polly and Danny for next week, you can email howtowin@thetimes.co.uk, or you can WhatsApp 0333 003 2353. Thanks to Danny and Polly. Peter will be back next week as well. That was How to Win an Election.
How to Win an Election, wherever you get your podcasts from.